Before we take the first bite of this dark and twisted tale, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. This is one reservation you won't want to lose. Now, sharpen your knives and prepare your senses. We're about to uncover the poison in the pantry. This is the case of the final course. The first death was a tragedy that shook the culinary world of the city of Viridia. Antoine Dubois, a celebrated chef of the old school, a man whose restaurant, Lucille Bleu, had held 3 Michelin stars for a decade, was found dead in his own kitchen. He was discovered by his sous chef at dawn, slumped over his pristine stainless steel prep station. A single, perfect ortolan, the controversial and illegal delicacy, lying on a plate before him. The initial coroner's report was swift and seemingly conclusive. A massive, sudden heart attack, likely brought on by the immense stress of his profession and a lifetime of rich food. The city's food critics wrote flowery obituaries, eulogizing a master of French cuisine. His rivals offered solemn, respectful sound bites to the press. The culinary world mourned, and then, as is its way, it moved on. Lucille Bleu, without its master, closed its doors a month later, its 3 stars winking out of the gastronomic firmament. This was not a case that would normally cross the desks of Detective Izzy Rossi and her partner Marcus Thorne. They were homicide detectives, not coroners. But 6 months later, a second, eerily similar tragedy occurred. The victim this time was Marco Ricci, a fiery, innovative young chef who had just earned his first Michelin star for his daring, avant-garde Italian restaurant, Nostro. He was the new king of the Viridia food scene, a culinary rock star. He was found in his kitchen late one night by a cleaning crew, dead on the floor. On the counter above him was a plate of his signature dish, a deconstructed carbonara with a cured egg yolk. The coroner's verdict was, once again, a heart attack, a tragic loss of a brilliant young talent. 2 of the city's top chefs, both Michelin-starred, both at the pinnacle of their careers, dead from heart attacks in their own kitchens within 6 months. It was a tragic coincidence, the media reported, a grim testament to the high-pressure world of haute cuisine. But Izzy Rossi didn't believe in coincidences that neat. 2 top chefs, both in their prime, both dying alone in their kitchens right after getting a major award or accolade. She mused to Thorne, pinning photos of the 2 men to the whiteboard in their office. It's a pattern. I don't know what it means yet, but it's there. Thorne, a man whose culinary tastes ran to a well-made cheeseburger and a cold beer, was skeptical. They're chefs, Izzy. They live on butter, stress, and no sleep. Their hearts are ticking time bombs. It's an occupational hazard. But Izzy's instincts, honed by years of seeing the hidden narratives in seemingly random events, told her otherwise. At her insistence, she and Thorne began a quiet, unofficial inquiry. They started by digging into the lives of the 2 dead men. Dubois, the old master, and Ricci, the young Turk, were bitter rivals. They had clashed in the press, their culinary philosophies a study in opposites. Dubois championed tradition and classical technique, while Ricci was a modernist who embraced foams, gels, and spherification. Their only common ground was their mutual disdain. The detective's investigation led them into the hermetic, high-stakes world of Viridia's restaurant scene. It was a world of intense pressure, fragile egos, and vicious, often personal, rivalries. They interviewed sommeliers, sous chefs, and dishwashers, piecing together a picture of a community where a single bad review could ruin a career and a Michelin star was a godlike anointment. In this world, one name kept coming up, a figure who seemed to exist at the periphery of both tragedies. Her name was Serafina Sarah Gallo. Sarah Gallo was a chef of immense, almost mythical talent. She was a culinary prodigy, a woman who had trained under the most demanding chefs in the world. Her style was unique, a deeply personal and almost poetic approach to food that defied categorization. But Sarah was also an enigma. She was notoriously reclusive, rarely giving interviews or appearing at industry events. Her restaurant, Nocturne, was a small, almost hidden establishment in a quiet, forgotten corner of the city. Nocturne had no sign, took no reservations from the public, and was open only a few nights a week. To dine there was to receive a personal invitation from the chef herself. The lucky few who had eaten there spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones. They described meals that were not just food, but experiences, narratives told in flavors and textures, dishes that could evoke a forgotten childhood memory or a line of poetry. Sarah Gallo was not just a chef. She was a culinary artist, a high priestess of gastronomy. But she was also, Izzy discovered, a woman haunted by a deep and abiding bitterness. Years ago, Sarah had been the rising star of Viridia. She had been the brilliant young sous chef to Antoine Dubois at Lucille Bleu. It was an open secret in the industry that many of the restaurant's most celebrated dishes were her creations. But when the time came for her to step into the spotlight, Dubois, a man of the old school who believed a woman's place was not at the head of a Michelin-starred kitchen, had refused to promote her. He had taken the credit for her work and then, when she had protested, he had quietly and ruthlessly fired her, effectively blackballing her from every top restaurant in the country. Her connection to the second victim, Marco Ricci, was more recent and just as bitter. Ricci had been her protégé, her one and only student. She had taken him in when he was a struggling line cook, taught him her secrets, and helped him develop his unique style. They had been inseparable, with many whispering of a romance between the intense young chef and his enigmatic mentor. But when Ricci had achieved his own success, he had publicly and cruelly disavowed her influence, claiming his genius was his alone. He had stolen her techniques, her philosophy, and then erased her from his own story. Sarah Gallo had a powerful, deeply personal motive to hate both men. She was the ghost in their success stories, the secret ingredient they had both tried to erase. And now they were both dead. Their celebrated restaurants shuttered. Izzy and Thorne went to Nocturne. The restaurant was a small, unmarked door in a quiet, ivy-covered alley. Inside, it was a world of shadows and candlelight, a dark, intimate space that felt more like a secret chapel than a restaurant. They found Sarah Gallo in her kitchen, a small, impeccably clean space that was a stark contrast to the sprawling industrial kitchens of her rivals. She was a striking woman in her late 30s, with piercing, intelligent dark eyes, a cascade of dark hair pulled back in a severe braid, and a stillness that was both unnerving and captivating. She moved with a silent, fluid grace, her hands, stained with beet juice and spices, seeming to conduct a silent symphony of preparation. She was not surprised to see them. "Detectives," she said, her voice a low, melodic contralto. She did not stop her work, her knife moving with hypnotic precision through a pile of exotic mushrooms. "I was wondering when you would come. The city is full of talk. 2 great chefs gone. It's a tragedy, of course." There was no hint of irony in her voice, but her eyes held a faint, cold amusement. She answered their questions with a calm, detached poise. She freely admitted her disdain for both Dubois and Ricci. "Antoine was a thief of a particular kind," she said, her knife never pausing. "He stole my hands, my palate, my soul, and passed them off as his own. Marco, he was a more intimate kind of thief. He stole my heart, and then he stole my voice." Her alibis for the times of both deaths were, on the surface, solid. She was a recluse. She was almost always at her restaurant, alone, prepping for service. There were no witnesses who could place her with either of the victims. Izzy, whose own palate was more sensitive than Thorne's, watched Sarah's hands, the way she handled her ingredients with an almost religious reverence. She noticed the small, carefully labeled jars of tinctures, oils, and powders that lined her shelves. It was the apothecary of a master. "We have reason to believe that the victim's heart attacks may not have been from natural causes," Izzy said, taking a direct approach. Sarah finally stopped her work. She turned to face them, wiping her hands on her apron. "Food is a powerful thing, detective," she said, her dark eyes locking onto Izzy's. "It can nourish, can delight, can evoke memory. And, in the wrong hands or the right ones, it can be a weapon. Every chef knows this. The garden is full of both life and death. The difference between a medicine and a poison is often just the dose." It was a veiled confession, an intellectual challenge. She was telling them that she was capable, that she had the knowledge. But she was daring them to prove it. The conversation had given Izzy the thread she needed. She requested full, unredacted toxicology reports on both victims. The original reports had shown no signs of common poisons. But Izzy asked the new toxicologist to look for something else, something more esoteric. She sent him a list of rare, obscure plants and fungi, a list she had compiled after hours of research into historical and botanical poisons, a list inspired by the strange, exotic ingredients she had seen in Sarah's kitchen. The results came back a week later, and they were the bombshell that turned the case from a quiet inquiry into a full-blown murder investigation. The toxicologist had found microscopic traces of a complex, synthesized alkaloid in the tissues of both victims. It was a poison derived from the nectar of the aconitum, a beautiful, purple-flowered plant also known as wolfsbane or monkshood. The alkaloid was a masterpiece of lethal chemistry. It was a potent cardiotoxin, designed to induce a massive, violent heart attack that was almost indistinguishable from a natural coronary. It was odorless, tasteless, and, in the minute doses required to kill, almost completely untraceable after death. It was the perfect murder weapon for a chef, a single, invisible drop in a sauce, a fine, unseen powder on a piece of meat. They had their weapon. They had their suspect. But they still had no idea how Sarah had delivered her poisoned cuisine. She was a recluse. She had never set foot in her rivals' restaurants. How did she get the poison onto their plates? The discovery of the wolfsbane-derived poison transformed the investigation. Izzy and Thorne now had proof of a double homicide, committed by a killer of extraordinary skill and patience. Sarah Gallo was their only suspect, a woman with the motive, the means, her deep botanical knowledge, and the psychopathic calm to carry out such a sophisticated plot. The problem was, the case against her was still a web of circumstance and theory. They couldn't place her at either crime scene. She was a ghost who had somehow managed to kill from a distance. Thorne, ever the pragmatist, was convinced she had an accomplice. She's got to have someone on the inside, he argued, pacing in front of the murder board, which was now dominated by a large, unervingly beautiful photo of a purple monkshood flower, a disgruntled sous chef, a waiter, someone who could slip the poison into the food for her. They descended once again on the staffs of the now-shuttered Lucille Bleu and Nostro. They re-interviewed dozens of cooks, servers, and suppliers, looking for a link to Sarah Gallo. They found a world of hushed admiration and fear when it came to her. She was a legend, an outcast genius. Many of the younger cooks revered her, but they found no one with a direct personal connection, no secret acolyte who would be willing to commit murder for her. Sarah Gallo was a solitary artist. She worked alone. Izzy was convinced the delivery method was more subtle, a trick of the trade that only someone deeply embedded in the culinary world would understand. She began a deep, obsessive dive into the supply chain of the city's high-end restaurants. She learned about the exclusive farmers, the rare mushroom foragers, the specialty butchers, and the purveyors of exotic, imported goods. It was a closed, almost secretive community, built on personal relationships and trust. She spent days cross-referencing the invoices and delivery logs from both victims' restaurants, looking for an overlap, a single supplier who had delivered to both Lucille Bleu and Nostro, and who might also have a connection to Sarah Gallo. The work was painstaking, a search for a single name in a mountain of paperwork. She finally found it. A small, exclusive company called Viridian Purveyors. They specialized in rare and foraged ingredients, wild herbs, exotic spices, and heirloom produce. They were the preferred supplier for a dozen of the city's top restaurants. According to the invoices, Viridian Purveyors had made a delivery to Lucille Bleu on the morning of Antoine Dubois's death. The delivery included a case of a very specific, rare brand of French butter. 6 months later, they had made a delivery to Nostro on the afternoon of Marco Ricci's death. That delivery included a batch of custom-cured guanciale, the pork jowl used in his signature carbonara. The owner and sole employee of Viridian Purveyors was a man named Julian Croft. When Izzy ran his name, she found a connection that made her blood run cold. Julian Croft had been Sarah Gallo's sommelier and business partner at her first, failed restaurant, years before she had opened Nocturne. He was one of the few people who could be considered a friend. They brought Julian Croft in for questioning. He was a small, nervous man with darting eyes and an air of perpetual anxiety. He was terrified. He admitted his connection to Sarah, but he swore he knew nothing of any poison. Sarah is intense, he stammered, wringing his hands. She's a genius, but she's demanding. She insists on the best. I just get her what she asks for. Under pressure, his story began to unravel. He admitted that Sarah didn't just buy ingredients from him. She also gave him things. Small, artisanal products she made herself. A special batch of infused olive oil, a custom-blended curry powder, a jar of rare, preserved mushrooms. She would ask him to pass them along as professional compliments to other chefs, his top clients. It was a common practice in the industry, a way of sharing ideas and building relationships. Julian, eager to curry favor with his most important customers, was happy to oblige. He was her unwitting mule. He told them about the last 2 gifts Sarah had asked him to deliver. One was a small, beautifully wrapped block of artisanal butter, which he had delivered to Antoine Dubois. The other was a piece of guanciale, which Sarah had cured herself using a special blend of spices, which he had delivered to Marco Ricci. The method was now horrifyingly clear. It was a Trojan horse, delivered through the trusted channels of the city's most exclusive supplier. Sarah had weaponized the very culture of professional courtesy that defined her industry. She had found a way to place her poison directly into her victim's hands, disguised as a gift from a secret admirer. And she had tailored the poison's vessel to each victim. For Dubois, the master of French cuisine, the poison was hidden in the heart of his most essential ingredient, butter. For Ricci, the innovator of Italian food, it was in the soul of his signature dish, the cured pork. These were not just murders. They were critiques. They were brutal, poetic acts of culinary justice. She was not just killing her rivals. She was destroying their legacies, using their own signature dishes as the instruments of their demise. They had their delivery method. They had a witness, however unwitting. The case was getting stronger, but it was still circumstantial. They had no sample of the poisoned butter or the guanciale. It had been consumed or disposed of. They needed to find a direct, physical link between Sarah Gallo and the Wolfsbane. They obtained a warrant to search Nocturne. The raid was conducted in the dead of night. The restaurant was as quiet and still as a tomb. In the small, immaculate kitchen, they found Sarah's apothecary of rare ingredients. But there was no Wolfsbane, no lab equipment, nothing that overtly pointed to the manufacturing of a sophisticated poison. She was too clever for that. The search seemed to be a dead end. But Izzy, remembering Sarah's words, "The garden is full of both life and death," was drawn to the restaurant's one unexpected feature. Behind the building, in a small, walled-off patch of forgotten city land, was a garden. It was a lush, chaotic, and beautiful place, filled with strange and exotic plants. It was Sarah's private pantry. They brought in a team of forensic botanists. For hours, they cataloged every plant, every herb, every flower. They found rare Peruvian mints, exotic Japanese citrus trees, and a dozen varieties of chili peppers Izzy had never even heard of. But they found no aconitum. Just as they were about to give up, one of the botanists, a young, sharp-eyed graduate student, called Izzy over to a small, unassuming cluster of plants in a shaded corner. The plants had lush, green, parsley-like leaves. "This is Conium maculatum," the student said, pointing with a gloved finger. "Commonly known as hemlock, the poison that killed Socrates. It's a powerful neurotoxin." Next to it was another plant, this one with beautiful, bell-shaped flowers. "And this is Atropa belladonna," she continued. "Deadly nightshade, causes paralysis and hallucinations. And over here," she pointed to a vine with bright red berries. "Is rosary pea, contains abrin, one of the most potent toxins on the planet." The garden wasn't just a pantry. It was a pharmacopoeia of death. Sarah Gallo's beautiful secret garden was quite literally a poison garden. She had been cultivating the raw ingredients for her deadly recipes right outside her kitchen door. They still hadn't found the wolfsbane, but they had found something just as damning. A clear and undeniable expertise in the cultivation of lethal flora. But it was what they found hidden beneath a loose flagstone at the entrance to the garden that finally sealed the case. It was a small, locked metal box. Inside was a collection of antique-looking glass vials, each containing a small amount of a viscous, dark liquid. And there was a leather-bound journal. The journal was not a diary. It was a recipe book. It was filled with Sarah's elegant, precise handwriting. But these were not recipes for food. They were recipes for death. Each page was dedicated to a different poison, detailing the methods of extraction, refinement, and synthesis. It was the work of a master chemist, a culinary Mengel. The final pages of the book were dedicated to her masterpiece, the cardiotoxin derived from wolfsbane. She wrote of it with an artist's passion, calling it the kiss of the ghost, a poison that sings the heart into its final, silent aria. And she had detailed two specific applications of this recipe. One, emulsified into a fat, for the decadent traditionalist, and the other, infused into a cured meat, for the arrogant modernist. And in a small vial, tucked into a pocket in the journal's cover, was a sample of the final, purified product. The lab confirmed it was a perfect match for the poison found in the bodies of both Antoine Dubois and Marco Ricci. They had it all. The weapon, the delivery system, and the confession, written in the cold, precise language of a recipe. The secret ingredient was not just poison. It was a deep, simmering, and perfectly executed revenge. The evidence they had found in the poison garden was overwhelming and irrefutable. The recipe book was a confession in Sarah Gallo's own hand, a detailed blueprint of her crimes. The vials of her synthesized wolfsbane toxin were the murder weapons, a direct forensic link to the deaths of her two rivals. The case was, for all intents and purposes, closed. The standard procedure would be a quiet, pre-dawn raid on her apartment, a swift arrest, and a silent ride to the station. But Izzy, who had been immersed in the psychology of this unique and brilliant killer, felt that such a mundane ending would be a disservice to the terrifying artistry of the case. Sarah was not a common criminal. She was a performer, a storyteller who used flavor and chemistry as her medium. Her crimes were her masterpieces. Izzy felt a strange, professional obligation to let her have a fitting final scene. She convinced a skeptical but intrigued district attorney to try a different approach. They wouldn't arrest Sarah at her home. They would go to her restaurant. They would let her serve one last meal. The plan was audacious and not without risk. Izzy and Thorne, along with the DA and the police chief, would be the only patrons at Nocturne that night. They made a reservation under a false name, a name they knew Sarah, with her connections to the city's elite, would recognize as a major food critic. A team of plainclothes officers would be discreetly positioned in the alley outside, ready to move in. They arrived at the unmarked door at the appointed time. The restaurant was as dark and as silent as ever, a pocket of shadow in the bustling city. Sarah Gallo greeted them at the door. She was dressed in her simple, elegant chef's whites, her face an unreadable mask of calm professionalism. If she was surprised to see the faces of the detectives who had been hunting her, she gave no sign. "Good evening," she said, her voice a low, even melody. "I was expecting you. Your table is ready." She led them to the restaurant's single, large table, a slab of dark, polished wood in the center of the candlelit room. The air was filled with the complex, intoxicating aromas of her kitchen. What followed was the most surreal and tension-filled meal of their lives. Sarah Gallo served them a multi-course tasting menu, a silent, solitary performance. She would emerge from the kitchen with each course, place it before them, and describe it in her soft, poetic voice. Each dish was a work of art, a complex and beautiful creation that was almost too stunning to eat. A chilled cucumber soup that tasted of a summer evening, a piece of slow-roasted lamb that was impossibly tender, a dessert of spun sugar and wild berries that looked like a jeweled bird's nest. As they ate, they engaged in a quiet, coded conversation. They spoke of food, of art, of passion and betrayal, never once mentioning the murders directly, but the subtext of every word hung heavy in the air. A great dish requires balance, don't you think, chef? The DA asked, tasting a complex seafood creation. A balance of flavors, sweet, salt, sour, and bitterness. Bitterness is an essential element, Sarah replied, her dark eyes glittering in the candlelight. It provides contrast. It reminds us of what is sweet. Some palates, of course, cannot appreciate it. They find it unpalatable. The meal was a masterpiece, but for Izzy and her colleagues, every bite was a gamble. They knew she had to know why they were there. Was this final meal a gesture of surrender? Or was it her final, defiant act? Was the food they were eating a peace offering? Or was it, too, laced with the kiss of the ghost? They ate sparingly, their senses on high alert, a team of paramedics waiting just outside the door. Finally, the last course was cleared. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, but this time, she was not carrying a plate. She was carrying a single, beautiful, purple monkshood flower in a slender glass vase. She placed it in the center of the table. "It's a beautiful flower, isn't it?" she said, her voice a soft whisper. So much power, so much beauty, in something so deadly. Nature's perfect art. "It's over, Sarah," Izzy said quietly, breaking the spell. "We found your garden. We found your recipe book." Sarah Gallo looked at her, and for the first time, a genuine sad smile touched her lips. "So you did," she said. "The final ingredient, the provenance. Every great dish has a story, detective. I suppose you have discovered mine." She did not resist as Thorne stood and placed the handcuffs on her wrists. There was no struggle, no denial. Her performance was over. She had served her last supper. Her confession, when it came, was delivered with the same calm, intellectual detachment with which she had described her food. She told the story of her betrayal by Du Bois and Ricci, not with anger, but with the cold, sorrowful air of an artist describing a flawed masterpiece. "They were men of immense talent," she explained, sitting in the cold, gray interview room, her chef's whites now seeming like a costume from another life. "But they lacked soul. They took my art and they commercialized it. They made it loud and vulgar and profitable. They were like chefs who would take a perfect, rare ingredient and bury it in a cheap, heavy sauce. They didn't just steal from me. They committed a culinary sin. And for that, there is only one judgment." She described her method with a chilling, professional pride. The years of research into botany and chemistry, the patient cultivation of her poison garden, the careful, artistic creation of her signature toxin, the way she had engineered the deliveries, a perfect, untraceable chain of complicity. "I didn't want them to suffer," she said, a statement of chilling, sincere arrogance. "The kiss of the ghost is merciful. It is swift and silent. It is an ending with a clean palate. I simply sent their dishes back to the kitchen." An editor's note, a final, necessary critique. Sarah Gallo's trial was a sensation. The media called her the poison chef, a real-life Borgia of the culinary world. Her story, a dark and twisted fable of ambition, genius, and revenge, captivated and horrified the city. Months later, Nocturne was shuttered, its dark, intimate dining room empty, its poison garden uprooted and incinerated by a hazmat team. Izzy and Thorne sat in a cheap, brightly lit diner, a world away from the shadows and whispers of haute cuisine. Thorne was happily eating a cheeseburger. Izzy was stirring a cup of coffee, her mind still lingering on the strange, dark poetry of the case. "You know," Thorne said, chewing thoughtfully, "I think I'll stick to places where the deadliest thing on the menu is the cholesterol." Izzy smiled, a faint, tired smile. "She was a monster," she said quietly, "but she was also a genius. It's a terrifying thing, when a talent that great is curdled by a bitterness that deep." She thought of Sarah, of her quiet, deadly passion, of the way she had turned her life's work into an instrument of death. She had taken the most fundamental human act, the sharing of food, and turned it into the ultimate act of betrayal. The city of Viridia would eventually crown new culinary kings, but for a long time, a shadow would hang over every Michelin-starred plate, a whispered question about the secret ingredient, a memory of the chef who had served revenge as the final unforgettable course.